The wind howls at -40, a biting chill that cuts through the air with sharp precision. Ice crystals swirl around like microscopic blades, freezing everything they touch. A small group of humans huddles at the entrance of a cave, seeking refuge from the brutal elements in what would one day be known as France. But this isn't the scene of desperation your history books might lead you to believe. Look closer. A child's laughter rings out as her grandmother weaves intricate shadow puppets on the firelit walls. The men, stoic yet methodical, sort stone blanks, preparing for tomorrow's tool making. Women with deft hands stitch waterproof seams with sinew thread, so fine it would rival the best modern tailors. The air is thick with the scent of roasting mammoth fat, a smell that doesn't evoke desperation, but instead signals a feast for a thriving, resilient community. This isn't the final meal of a dying species, but a vibrant celebration of survival in the face of Earth's most brutal cold snap. It is 25,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, an era when temperatures plunged to levels humanity had never before encountered. Yet, what history often forgets to tell us is that our ancestors didn't merely survive the Ice Age, they thrived in it. While saber-toothed cats froze to death in their dens and even cold-adapted Neanderthals disappeared from the earth, Homo sapiens not only endured but flourished. The numbers are staggering. Imagine 2-mile-thick ice sheets crushing everything in their path, stretching from Scandinavia to Scotland. Picture sea levels plummeting by 400 feet and temperatures in Europe averaging 15 degrees Celsius below today's levels. The Sahara, once a vast expanse of arid desert, is transformed into a lush, green paradise, dotted with lakes. The Amazon, unrecognizable, reduced to a sweeping grassland. This was no ordinary cold snap, it was an alien world, a planet where survival seemed impossible. For 100,000 years, the ice ages had come and gone, but this particular freeze was different. Beginning around 33,000 years ago, temperatures didn't just drop gradually. They plummeted catastrophically. The world became an unrelenting freezer, and for the next 8,000 years, humanity would call it home. In caves across Europe and Asia, archaeologists find irrefutable evidence that these were not the last remnants of a dying people, but the thriving remains of complex, vibrant societies. At Dole Vestige in the Czech Republic, archaeologists unearthed ceramic figurines, pieces of art, created when survival was supposedly the sole focus of humanity's existence. In Russia, they discover homes built from hundreds of mammoth bones, arranged with such architectural precision that they challenge even the most advanced modern builders. The traditional image of the caveman dragging his knuckles through the snow is pure fiction. These were not primitive beings. They were engineers who crafted the world's first weatherproof clothing, artists who painted masterpieces by the flickering light of fire, and traders who moved rare materials across vast distances of frozen wilderness. They were survivors of an apocalypse that lasted longer than all of recorded human history. Yet they didn't just survive, they flourished. At Sinanjar, Russia, archaeologists discover a grave unlike any other. A man, elderly by the standards of his time, lies buried 34,000 years ago. His grave is adorned with 3,000 mammoth ivory beads, each requiring hours to create. His clothing, reconstructed from the intricate bead patterns, would have taken over 2,500 hours to make. This wasn't mere subsistence, it was sophisticated artistry, a testament to the ingenuity of humanity in the face of adversity. The Ice Age didn't just shape the land. It molded humanity itself, our bodies, our minds, and our social structures. Every trait that defines us as human beings, from creativity to cooperation, was forged in these frozen, unforgiving temperatures, ones that would have killed an unprepared modern human in an instant. This is the greatest survival tale never properly told, the moment in history when humanity's finest hour unfolded. The Ice Age was hell frozen over, and humanity rose to meet it. Imagine waking up one day only to discover that the entire world around you is changing, not over centuries, but within mere decades. Your grandfather's stories of warm summers now become nothing more than myth. The berries your mother once gathered so easily no longer grow. The reindeer migration routes, which your people have followed for generations, vanish as though they never existed. This is not science fiction. This is the Younger Dryas. 12,900 years ago, the world was on the cusp of warming. The great ice sheets were retreating. Forests crept northward across Europe, and humans followed the warmth, spreading into new territories like flowers reaching for the sun. And then, in the span of what might have been a single human lifetime, winter returned violent and unrelenting. The numbers are incomprehensible. In Greenland, temperatures plummeted by 15 degrees Celsius, not over millennia, but over the course of mere decades. Ice cores from the region show this chilling change happened in two stages. An initial 5 degrees Celsius drop in just a few years, followed by a further 10 degrees Celsius plunge. Imagine New York City's climate suddenly resembling that of northern Alaska. This was the reality our ancestors faced. And what makes this story even more extraordinary is that we have witnesses. In a cave in Syria, archaeologists uncover something remarkable. Sediment layers from Abu Arara that tell the story of a paradise transforming into tundra. Layer by layer, the ancient pollen reveals the gradual disappearance of wild wheat and rye, the vanishing of trees, and the slow but steady onset of a frozen desert. In just one human generation, a land of plenty became an inhospitable wasteland. Yet the villagers didn't surrender. They adapted. They invented agriculture. Faced with the threat of starvation, these resourceful humans began cultivating the few wild grasses that could survive the freezing temperatures. The Younger Dryas didn't just test humanity's limits. It transformed us, shifting us from wandering hunters into settled farmers. Crisis became catalyst. Scientists continue to debate what caused this frozen apocalypse. The leading theory sounds like something straight out of a disaster movie. As North American ice sheets melted, a massive lake, Lake Agassiz, larger than all of today's Great Lakes combined, formed. When an ice dam burst, fresh water, equivalent to all the world's rivers, combined, poured into the Atlantic Ocean. This freshwater tsunami disrupted ocean currents that brought warmth to Europe, triggering a catastrophic collapse of the climate system. Within months, perhaps even within years, the conveyor belt of heat was permanently stopped, and the Younger Dryas began. It lasted for 1,300 years longer than the time between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance. Entire cultures rose and fell in this single cold snap. In North America, the Clovis culture, known for their sophisticated hunting tools and distinctive spear points, vanished. Their toolkit, once widespread from Alaska to Mexico, disappeared from the archaeological record as if erased by some unseen hand. One century they were everywhere. The next, gone without a trace. But in their place, new cultures emerged, cultures that were diverse, adaptable, and innovative. The Folsom people, for instance, developed even finer projectile points. Coastal peoples turned to the sea, embracing new ways of survival. The crisis that wiped out the mammoths also gave birth to a dozen new ways of being human. The younger Dryas teaches us something profound. Climate change is not a gradual process. It's a switch, not a dial. When it flips fast. Our ancestors survived temperature swings that make today's climate change seem subtle in comparison. But they didn't just endure, they evolved. Each crisis forced humanity to innovate. Each catastrophe created new opportunities. The Ice Age came in a day, but humans, we adapted in a generation. The story of survival was just beginning. Stand where London sprawls today and imagine stacking 10 Empire State Buildings on top of each other. That's how high the ice towered during the last glacial maximum. 2 miles of grinding, groaning glaciers pressed down with the weight of mountains. But here's the breathtaking part. While half of North America lay buried beneath ice just miles away, vast grasslands teemed with life. The Ice Age didn't blanket the earth in uniform white. It created a patchwork planet of extremes. Where New York City now stands, it was once buried under a mile of ice. Siberia, largely ice-free, stretched like an endless steppe from Spain to Alaska, a colossal belt of opportunity that defied the bitter cold and offered sanctuary to life in a frozen world, while the English Channel, now drowned beneath the sea, existed then as a grassy plain where humans stalked wild horses under the pale light of glacial skies, and the Grand Banks off Newfoundland, today the haunt of fishermen, once thrived as a prime refuge for great mammoth herds, their thunderous migrations echoing across icy wind-swept plains as sea levels plunged 400 feet. Earth's waters locked into monolithic glaciers, revealing vast expanses of continental shelf like ancient Atlantis and Diogenes, where Indonesia joined Asia, Britain fused to Europe, Japan bridged to Korea, and Tasmania melded seamlessly into Australia, unveiling entire continents that emerged like silent titans from the deep. But none were as breathtaking or vital as Binja, the jewel of the north, where the Bering Strait now lies and separates Alaska from Siberia with 55 miles of frigid water. Once existed as sprawling grassland 2 Texases wide, not a narrow crossing, but a living nation in its own right, stretching 1,000 miles from north to south, a place where humanity did not simply pass through, but paused for millennia. And at Lake E5 in Alaska, archaeology has unveiled the astonishing truth: humans didn't merely cross Binja. They lived there, thrived there, built their world upon its frozen soil, and genetic markers in Native Americans today trace back to this long-standing isolation, proving that for thousands of years these people weren't stranded, they were home, and the land they occupied would make any modern human gasp in disbelief. The mammoth steppe, a lost ecosystem found nowhere on Earth today, was neither tundra nor grassland, but something wholly unique. A realm of nutritious grasses, Arctic willows, and cold hardy herbs that fed an explosion of megafauna unrivaled in history, where a single square mile could sustain mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, horses, reindeer, muskoxen, bison, and antelope, stalked by lions twice the size of those on the African plains, bears more massive than any grizzly, and wolves with jaws powerful enough to shatter bone. A place of endless life and impossible abundance. the Serengeti amplified tenfold, and paleontologist Dale Guthrie's calculations remain jaw-dropping 10 times the animal biomass of today's African savannas, where the Serengeti may hold 1 ton of animal per square kilometer. The mammoth steppe held 10. And what made this environment truly extraordinary wasn't just the fauna, but the light. The endless light, because with sea levels down and Earth's reflectivity altered, clear skies dominated much of the globe, and summers bathed vast swaths of the planet in 24-hour daylight, while winters, though brutally cold, were surprisingly dry, with places like Siberia receiving less snow than Chicago does today, creating ideal grazing conditions for herbivores and ideal hunting conditions for humans. And at the Yana River in Siberia, 32,000 years ago, humans built a permanent settlement at 71 degrees north, 500 miles above the Arctic Circle. Not a camp, but a town, rich with hundreds of tools, ornaments, and artifacts, a testament not to desperation but deliberate choice. And this reimagined Earth became a nexus of human opportunity, where one could walk from Paris to New York without wetting their feet, where trade routes flowed unbroken from Scotland to Siberia, ferrying not just goods, but ideas, genes, and innovations across continents. And in this boundless world, humans did not merely huddle on the edges, they ruled. And in a shelter near the Black Sea 45,000 years ago, firelight shimmered across the concentrated face of a woman, her hands weathered by time but steady as she held a sliver of bird bone no larger than a matchstick, the eyed needle, 3 inches of polished bone that would decide who lived and who perished. Because before this moment, humans draped themselves in crude hides, functional in temperate climates, but death sentences in the severe cold, as wind sliced through seams and snow crept into gaps. And in -40 temperatures, the unprotected had mere hours to live. But now, the woman threaded a sinew so fine it seemed invisible through the needle's eye, and sewed reindeer hide with such precision that the resulting seam was not only tight, it was waterproof, windproof, life-proof, and what she produced wasn't clothing, it was engineering. For as Dr. Ian Gilligan from the University of Sydney declared, without the needle, humans could not have survived north of the 45th parallel during the Ice Age, an area encompassing half the inhabited world today, and the archaeological record supports this with breathtaking clarity. From Denisova Cave in Siberia, where 50,000-year-old needles emerged like time travelers from the past, each one a vessel of ancestral wisdom, knowledge of which bones worked best, how to shape the eye without cracking it, what angle formed the strongest tip. And by 35,000 years ago, humanity had developed a veritable wardrobe of specialized needles, thick ivory ones from mammoth bones for heavy outer layers, medium swan bone ones for inner garments, ultrafine rabbit bone needles for embroidery and ornamentation. And at the La Priel Mammoth site in Wyoming, archaeologists uncovered 32 needle fragments from at least 13 different animal sources: foxes, hares, birds, even the now extinct American cheetah, evidence not of crude struggle but of couture. And at Sinir in Russia, a man buried 28,000 years ago was dressed in garments adorned with 3 mammoth ivory beads. His reconstructed outfit, a tunic, leggings, cape, boots, and hat, took an estimated year to craft, form-fitting and layered with exacting care, following the same principles found in modern Arctic gear, from moisture-wicking inner layers to insulating cores and windproof shells, with only one difference: they used fur and skin where we use synthetics. And yet the function was identical. And this tiny tool, the needle, revolutionized not just survival, but civilization, enabling humans to tailor warmth to fit their bodies, eliminate deadly gaps, repair garments, and clothe children with precision that ensured generational survival. And in recent digs in Wyoming, yet another revelation surfaced: decoration. For these ancient needles didn't only bind hides, they crafted identities, adding fur trim, stitching patterns, perhaps even clan symbols. And in a world of fur-clad wanderers, your stitching became your story. And so the woman by the fire completes her work. Her needle born from the bone scraps of a hunted bird, her thread drawn from tendon, her garment a masterpiece. And as she layers for the killing, cold, soft birdskin base, downward grain fur tunic, stitched seams sealed with pine, pitch, and charcoal, she transforms from prey into predator, from wanderer into master of her world, embodying the genius of invention that made humanity not only survive the Ice Age, but rule it. The specialized functions of different furs reveal that Ice Age humans understood insulation at a molecular level in ways that rival modern science, selecting reindeer fur for primary winter garments due to its hollow heat-trapping hairs that create dead air spaces, functioning as nature's own fiberglass insulation, allowing a 5-pound reindeer parka to outperform a 20-pound wool equivalent. And for the outermost layer, they chose not wolf or bear, but wolverine fur, a seemingly odd choice until one considers its hydrophobic nature, its ability to repel moisture, and more critically, its resistance to frost accumulation from human breath, as unlike wolf fur that ices over within hours, wolverine remains frost-free even at -50, a fact still honored by today's Arctic explorers, who have yet to find anything superior. And further revelations continue to astonish as archaeologists analyzing fur remnants preserved in permafrost sites discover signs of selective breeding, indicating Ice Age humans did not merely wear whatever animals they caught, but actively preferred pelts with certain properties, perhaps even managing animal populations to yield better clothing materials. And at Costini in Russia, 25,000-year-old tailoring ascends to couture, with ivory needles so fine they rival modern surgical steel, decorative fur trim cut into geometric precision, and boots designed with separate soles sewn to uppers, a technique lost until rediscovered in medieval times, while children's clothing offers perhaps the most poignant insight: miniature replicas of adult garments, not rough copies, but meticulous duplicates, like a child's parka sewn from 30 individual ground squirrel pelts, each one tanned, tailored, and aligned to optimize both movement and insulation. And the mathematics of survival are staggering, as a single complete winter outfit might require 5 reindeer for main garments, 50 to 100 ground squirrels for underlayers, 2 or 3 wolves for trim, 1 bear for a sleeping robe, and uncounted smaller animals for gloves, hats, and accessories, meaning one person's clothing represented hundreds of successful hunts. And yet, even this staggering endeavor pales next to the most ingenious adaptation of all biological symbiosis, where garments worn constantly developed microbiomes of beneficial bacteria that helped regulate body temperature, manage moisture, and prevent infection, transforming clothing into living, evolving systems akin to sourdough starters. that improved over time. And in a world where modern extreme weather gear costs thousands and relies on synthetic fibers, these humans achieved superior results with stone tools and bone needles, crafting apparel that didn't merely insulate, but actively enhanced survival. Garments that lasted years and turned necessity into innovation, stitching each seam with an eye for engineering perfection where the margin of error was death. And thousands of miles away in the Ukrainian soil, a farmer's shovel strikes something hard, assumed to be a rock. But as he clears away the dark earth, a massive yellowed arc emerges, curved like a crescent moon, and larger than any bone should be, a mammoth jaw, sealed in silence for 15 millennia, leading in 1965 to one of the most revolutionary discoveries in prehistory, as archaeologists excavating at Mesorik uncover 4 massive structures not made of wood or stone, but of mammoth bones. Architecture that stuns not merely by its age but by its sophistication, with foundations composed of interlocked skulls, each weighing over 100 pounds, walls stacked with shoulder blades and pelvises like organic shingles, and long bones arched into supports, while tusks driven deep into the frozen ground anchor the entire structure in place. Engineering feats that demand an understanding of load-bearing, wind resistance, and thermal insulation far beyond what was thought possible, as Dr. Olga Soffer calculates that each house used up to 40,000 pounds of bone, gathered and transported in a world devoid of wheels, pulleys, or draft animals. And what truly defies belief is that these were not freshly hunted remains, but carefully selected bones scavenged from natural death sites, some miles distant, sorted by type for specific architectural roles, skulls for foundations, scapulae for walls, femurs for rafters, and at the site of Branashev, bones are cut with interlocking joints like prehistoric Lincoln logs, while tusks are bent into arcs through controlled heating, a technique requiring fine mastery of temperature. And certain bones show evidence of drilling, lashing, and even surface treatments, while inside, clear divisions emerge sleeping areas padded with Arctic fox furs, workspaces positioned near light sources, and storage pits carved into permafrost. And at Mizzen, one painted mammoth skull is discovered that, when struck, resonates with distinct pitches, transforming part of the structure into an architectural drum, embedding music within the walls themselves. And the question arises, why bones beyond wood scarcity? And the answer lies in bones' inherent properties, naturally water resistant, superior in insulation thanks to marrow cavities that trap air, and capable of maintaining internal temperatures up to 40 degrees warmer than outside conditions, a fact that turns these shelters into marvels of Ice Age engineering, with some sites like Kostini revealing massive circular structures assembled from the bones of over 60 mammoths, yet containing no signs of domestic life, no hearths, no sleeping areas, suggesting not homes but sacred spaces, perhaps community centers or ritual grounds. And the logistics of such construction are staggering, requiring dozens of people working in harmony, coordinating the sorting, transport, and assembly of bones in sequences so critical that one error could collapse the entire structure. And the longevity of these buildings speaks volumes, as some stood for centuries with evidence of generational rebuilding, indicating a deep cultural inheritance, where each family might add to a legacy shelter over time, embedding tradition into mammoth bone. And the symbolism cannot be overstated. living within the very beasts that symbolized the Ice Age, sleeping beneath their ribs, entering through their jaws, sending a message not just of survival, but dominion. And in the depths of the Cavemen 9 site, archaeologist William Murphy wipes away 23,000 years of sediment to reveal 3 hearths, not just evidence of fire, but of narrative of people anchoring their lives in warmth, light, and structure amidst a world of endless cold and silence, rewriting everything we thought we knew about the ingenuity and resilience of our ancestors. During Earth's deepest freeze, the last glacial maximum, fire was nearly impossible to find. With temperatures plunging to minus 50 degrees Celsius, survival without fire seemed impossible. But this was the mystery that confounded scientists for years, challenging their understanding of human ingenuity. At Cavemen 9, microscopic analysis revealed that these fires were no mere chance occurrences. They were strategic, calculated, and tailored for specific tasks. The large fires were used for communal heating and cooking. The medium ones maintained exact temperatures for crafting tools, and the small fires were dedicated to the most delicate work. These ancient humans understood fire with the precision of modern chemists manipulating reactions. But the key to survival was their innovation in fuel. Wood was scarce in the frozen tundra, with only a few dwarf willows and Arctic birch available. Burning it all would have meant certain death, so they adapted, creating bonfires, fat lamps, and dung furnaces. Each fuel source required distinct techniques, structures, and an extraordinary depth of knowledge. One of the most striking discoveries came from archaeologist Alexander Pryor, who unearthed burned bone fragments at Costini. These bones had reached temperatures over 650 degrees Celsius, a feat unimaginable without forced air prehistoric bellows. The bones weren't tossed on a fire. They were carefully prepared and cooked at specific temperatures, allowing marrow to burn hotter than wood itself. The invention of fat lamps revolutionized fire usage. These lamps, made from hollowed stone, seal blubber, and moss wicks, burned for days without needing to be refueled. They emitted no smoke and provided steady heat and portable light. In the endless darkness of Arctic winters, these lamps weren't just luxuries. They were lifelines. Then came a revelation from Doni Vestici, where ceramic technology was discovered not for pots, but for heating. 26,000 years ago, people had already mastered ceramic elements designed to store and radiate heat. Even after the fire had gone out, the ceramic pieces retained warmth for hours, showing a level of thermal control that modern engineers would envy. But despite all this ingenuity, the evidence of fire disappears during the coldest period, baffling researchers. Dr. Vera Alaz from the University of Algov proposed a radical theory. Our ancestors didn't need as much fire because they engineered their surroundings to minimize its need. They built super-insulated mammoth bone houses, created clothing so efficient that heating was less critical, and used the permafrost as a natural refrigeration system. It turned out that body heat alone, inside well-designed shelters with a few dozen people, could keep the temperature survivable. The evidence supports this theory with sites from the last glacial maximum showing smaller, more efficient hearths, communal fires serving entire communities, and heat banking systems that used stones in a manner similar to modern district heating. But the most ingenious discovery came from Siberia, where fire-cracked rocks arranged in specific patterns revealed a long-lost technique: hot stone cooking. Stones were heated in fires and then dropped into hide-lined pits filled with water. The water boiled, cooking the food without smoke, avoiding attracting predators or enemies. There was no wasted fuel, and the caloric extraction was maximized. Children, from a young age, learned how to make fire. Archaeologists found miniature fire-making kits in children's burial sites. Tiny strikers practiced tinder. They were taught the skills necessary for survival even before they could walk. But perhaps the most profound innovation was psychological. Fire was more than warmth. It was the very essence of community. The hearth became humanity's first social network. Around the fire, stories were told, knowledge shared, and bonds forged. In a world where darkness stretched for months, fire created an artificial day, enabling culture and civilization to flourish. Modern survival experts like Navy SEALs and Arctic researchers marvel at these ancient techniques. Our ancestors managed to make fire in extreme conditions with nothing more than rocks, fungus, and animal fat. They did it day in and day out for thousands of years, without matches, without failure. And failure, as they knew all too well, meant extinction. The fires of the Ice Age didn't just burn, they hid in plain sight, kept alive by those tropical apes, our ancestors, who refused to freeze. And from these flames, civilization was born. Forget the Hollywood depictions of mammoth hunting, where massive bull mammoths charge across the frozen steppe, chased by fur-clad hunters hurling spears. This image is pure fantasy. In reality, trying to throw a spear hard enough to penetrate 4 inches of tough hide, a layer of fat, and reach vital organs is impossible. Physics laughs at the idea of human arms achieving such force. The truth is far more ingenious. UC Berkeley archaeologist Scott Barham recently shattered decades of misconceptions about how humans hunted mammoths. Those famous Clovis points, once thought to be mounted on throwing spears, were actually planted into the ground, angled just right, waiting for the mammoth to charge. The energy generated by a charging animal is far greater than that generated by a human arm, explains Dr. John Sanseri. Picture this. You've spent generations studying mammoth behavior. You know their blind spots, their charging patterns, their movement through the land. You place your pikes in a narrow valley or between 2 rock outcrops. You position them with precision, ready for the oncoming beast. Then you become the bait. The mammoth charges and 9 tons of momentum meet an immovable spike, driven deep into its flesh by its own weight. The result is almost a form of extinction-level Aikido. The engineering behind it was flawless. The Clovis points weren't just sharp rocks. They were meticulously hafted with wooden shafts bound by sinew and reinforced with pine pitch. Some show signs of impact fractures consistent with the massive force exerted by a charging megafauna. But the Clovis points were only the beginning. At Schöningen in Germany, archaeologists uncovered wooden spears more than 400,000 years old that changed everything. These weren't crude sticks. They were engineered like modern javelins. They were thickest and heaviest at the front third for maximum penetration, tapered for aerodynamics, and balanced for throwing. Modern athletes tested replicas of these spears and found they could throw them with incredible accuracy, exceeding distances of 70 meters. The innovation didn't stop there. Around 30,000 years ago, spear throwers, levers that multiplied throwing force by 400%, emerged. With these tools, hunters could launch projectiles at speeds of up to 150 kilometers per hour. Modern tests show that these projectiles could penetrate even elephant hide at distances of 40 meters. By 20,000 years ago, the bow was invented, not the simple bent stick of cartoons, but a compound construction using horn, sinew, and specially chosen wood. African hunters still use such bows today, and they can pierce a buffalo at 50 paces. Ice Age bows, however, were likely even more powerful. Recent archaeology has revealed that these bows were paired with specialized ammunition tailored to different prey. Broad, thin points for reindeer, maximizing bleeding. Thick, narrow points for mammoths, designed to break ribs and penetrate deeply. Barbed points for fish, blunt points for birds. At Laurel in Wyoming, microscopic analysis showed that even these points were specialized by season. Sharper edges were used in winter, when animal hides were thickest, ensuring maximum effectiveness. But perhaps the most ingenious of all hunting techniques was the persistence hunt. Humans can't outrun prey, but they can outlast them. Their superpower wasn't speed. It was endurance. Wolves tire after just 20 minutes of chase, but humans could run for hours. In Africa, hunters still track antelope until the prey succumbs to heat exhaustion. In the Ice Age, freshly fallen snow revealed tracks, and a wounded animal left a trail of blood. Human hunters working in relays could pursue for days, but weapons were just tools. The real innovation lay in the mind. Ice Age hunters thought like their prey. They understood that reindeer always moved into the wind, so they hunted downwind. They knew mammoths would fiercely protect their calves, so they created diversions to separate them. They knew horses could be spooked by certain sounds, so they invented noisemakers to drive them. At Starcar, in Britain, 11,000 years ago, hunters wore deer skull headdresses, not for ritual, but for camouflage. Red deer, unlike other deer, would ignore hunters disguised as their kin. Those extra meters, just a few, meant the difference between success and starvation. Every technological leap built on the last. Hafting led to composite tools. Composite tools enabled specialized functions. Specialization drove efficiency, and efficiency created surplus. Surplus was the foundation of culture. Humans didn't conquer the Ice Age with brute force. They did it with physics, psychology, and patience. The mammoth never stood a chance. Now, picture the master at work. She sits cross-legged, a leather pad across her lap, holding a chunk of flint. She doesn't strike randomly. She's a precision engineer. She sees what others can't: cracks in the stone, paths of force through crystalline structures, hidden weaknesses that determine where the stone will break. With her antler hammer, she strikes once. The flint splits exactly where intended, revealing a surface that gleams like black glass. But she's only just begun. Welcome to the Stone Age's Swiss Army knife. By 40,000 years ago, tool-making had evolved from crude chipping to molecular engineering. Archaeologists have uncovered over 60 distinct types of tools from the Upper Paleolithic period. These were not variations. They were completely different tools for completely different jobs. It's like stumbling upon a frozen hardware store. The revolution began with a breakthrough blade technology. Instead of making one tool from one stone, Ice Age innovators learned to create multiple standardized blades from a single core, much like peeling identical slices from an apple. One core the size of a basketball could yield 50 razor-sharp blades, each one a foundation for specialized tools. The diversity of tools found by archaeologists is staggering. Bores for engraving so precise that they could carve microscopic lines into ivory, end scrapers for hide preparation, backed bladelets forming composite tools, and notch tools for straightening shafts. But then, the real game changer, hafting. 35,000 years ago, someone figured out how to attach stone to wood. A simple concept with world-changing implications. Suddenly, tools had leverage. They had reach. They could be replaced. Break your spear point? Pop in a new one. A different task? A new attachment. The multi-tool was born. At Pinsvent in France, archaeologists discovered an Ice Age workshop frozen in time. 15,000 years ago, someone sat at this very spot, crafting tools with controlled precision. The debris patterns revealed their techniques. Controlled pressure flaking using antler tools to remove flakes thinner than paper. The level of precision matched modern surgical instruments. Regional styles emerged like prehistoric patents, Solutrean points from France and Spain, so thin that light passed through them, crafted using heat treatment and pressure flaking. These tools were not only functional, they were works of art. Russian sites yielded different innovations, such as large unifacial tools for heavy butchering. Each region adapted its toolkit to local resources and needs. The genius of Ice Age toolmakers wasn't just in the tools themselves, but in the idea of composite tools. At Meserish, archaeologists uncovered grooved bones that baffled them for years. Then, someone realized the grooves fit microliths perfectly. These bones were handles holding rows of tiny stone inserts, prehistoric razors with replaceable blades. Modular technology invented 20,000 years before modern modules. Children learned by doing. Archaeological sites reveal thousands of practice pieces failed attempts at replicating adult tools. The learning curve was steep. Modern experimental archaeologists need months to reach basic competence. Ice Age children began learning at age 5, mastering complex techniques by age 15. Their lives depended on it. Heat treatment revolutionized the possibilities of toolmaking. By 72,000 years ago, humans in South Africa discovered that heating silica to precise temperatures transformed its molecular structure. Brittle stone became workable. Once difficult materials became pliable. It was material science that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Industrial Revolution. Prehistoric tool caches reveal forward-thinking logistics. At multiple sites, prepared cores and rough tools were buried, acting as supply depots for hunters traveling light. They could stop, grab pre-made tools, and continue their chase. It was logistics management, Ice Age style. The pinnacle of precision came with pressure flaking. Using antler or bone, craftsmen could remove flakes thinner than the atom. Their control was absolute. They could create serrated edges with teeth smaller than rice grains, notches precise enough to hold sinew threads, and points so sharp they could slice paper, even after 20,000 years. But tools weren't just functional. They were symbols of identity. French Magdalenian points differed from German ones, and Spanish styles were distinct from Russian. In a world of small bands and vast distances, your tools declared where you were from. Modern humans struggle to replicate these techniques with metal tools, but our ancestors did it with rocks, bones, and patience. Every strike required an understanding of physics. Every tool demanded hours of careful work. Every innovation built upon generations of knowledge. They didn't just chip stones. They transformed matter itself, one calculated blow at a time. The Ice Age toolkit wasn't primitive. It was precision incarnate. Now, picture the mammoth. 9 tons of fury charging across the frozen steppe. In our imagination, fur-clad hunters scatter, the beast's tusks sweeping through the air. But step into the archaeological tent at Cavemen in Austria, and a different story emerges from 24,000-year-old bones. Here's the shock. Of thousands of bones cataloged, over 90% belong to one animal. Not the mammoth, not the cave bear, but the reindeer. Winter kills everyone, says Dr. Kirsten Paster, running her fingers along the skull still attached to its antlers. This wasn't random hunting. Ice Age humans specifically targeted reindeer in their prime winter coats, their fur thickest, warmest, and most water-resistant. While modern obsession with mammoth hunting is widespread, the real survival story was following the reindeer. Think about it. A mammoth provides huge amounts of meat, yes, but hunting one? It's a lottery. The odds are astronomical. Reindeer, however, moved in predictable patterns. They migrated seasonally, gathered in herds, and most importantly, they provided everything: meat, fur, sinew, antler, and bone. Isotope analysis reveals that these Ice Age hunters weren't mere opportunists, they were specialists. Tooth-wear patterns found on human remains indicate a diet consistently high in reindeer meat, while cut marks on bones point to practiced, efficient butchery. These people understood reindeer anatomy like modern surgeons. But the true revelation came when archaeologists examined the age profiles of their prey. They primarily hunted calves and yearlings, not because they were easier to catch, but because young reindeer fur was the finest insulation nature could provide. 1 square inch contained more hollow hairs than any other deer species, perfect for trapping warm air. At the same site, archaeologists uncovered 62-eyed needles, 62, not for mending clothes, but as evidence of a textile factory. These were not simple garments. These people were creating fitted clothing with amazing skill. The needle sizes varied from thick bone piercers to delicate tools, finer than modern steel needles. Textile archaeologist Dr. Ian Gilligan explains they were making parkas with integrated hoods, mittens attached with sinew cords, and boots with multiple layers. The timing of the hunt was crucial. Reindeer began growing their winter coats in September, and by November, their fur was fully prime. Hunt too early, and the fur was thin. Hunt too late, and the spring shedding began. Ice Age humans had perhaps a 6 to 8 week window to gather an entire year's worth of clothing materials. Unlike the scattered distribution of mammoth remains, reindeer hunting camps clustered along their migration routes. Generation after generation returned to the same spots. At Pinsvent in France, archaeologists traced 12,000 years of continuous reindeer hunting at a single river crossing. This challenges the conventional image of Ice Age survival. While mammoth hunting was dramatic and exciting, reindeer hunting was the everyday reality. They were reliability in a world filled with uncertainty. Reindeer were survival, wrapped in fur. Your ancestors didn't dream of mammoth steaks. They dreamed of reindeer migrations, and those dreams kept them alive. In the archaeological storage room at the University of Tübingen, Dr. Amanda Henry holds a microscopic slide. What she's seeing redefines our understanding of the Ice Age. It's not a stone tool or an ancient bone. It's 30,000-year-old dental plaque, and it's full of plants. Starch grains, she says, adjusting the microscope. Lots of them. This Neanderthal was eating vegetables. For decades, we've imagined Ice Age humans as strict carnivores, surviving on mammoth steaks and reindeer haunches. The truth is, they were eating salads well, Ice Age salads. Cattail roots, hawthorn berries, wild carrots, and dozens of other plants were just beginning to be identified. The evidence comes from an unexpected source, fossilized plaque on ancient teeth. This biological garbage turns out to be a time capsule. By using new extraction techniques, researchers can identify plant cells, starch grains, even pollen trapped in prehistoric dental tartar. This changes everything, says Henry. These people had an encyclopedic knowledge of plants. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, the evidence is even more dramatic. Here, 30,000 years ago, someone built what can only be called a processing facility. Grinding stones, some weighing up to 50 pounds, show polish from thousands of hours of use. Microscopic analysis reveals that these weren't used for grinding pigments or minerals. They were processing plants. The wear patterns tell a specific story: circular motions for seeds, back and forth grinding for roots, different stones for different plants. This wasn't casual food preparation. It was systematic processing on an industrial scale. Why? The answer lies in human biology. Our brains consume 20% of our calories, twice the amount of other primates. Meat provides protein and fat, but the brain runs on glucose, and the most efficient source of glucose is starch from plants. Dr. Karen Hardy from the University of Barcelona made another startling discovery. Some of these plant starches showed evidence of cooking. They had been gelatinized by heat. This means Ice Age humans weren't just gathering plants, they were transforming them through cooking, making nutrients more available. This revelation is significant. Around 30,000 years ago, as the last glacial maximum approached, a new technology exploded across Europe. Ground stone tools, not for hunting, not for weapons, but for plants. It was a technological revolution that we've largely ignored, explains archaeologist Dr. Emanuela Cristiani. Grinding technology appeared simultaneously from Spain to Russia, suggesting a desperate need. Consider what this means. As the world grew colder and game became scarcer, humans didn't just suffer, they innovated. They turned to foods that required processing. Tough roots, hard seeds, fibrous tuberous foods that other predators couldn't access. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, 50,000-year-old Neanderthal remains tell an even more complex story. The dental calculus contains not just food plants, but medicinal ones, chamomile and yarrow. These have no nutritional value. They're bitter. They were used for medicine. The plant knowledge required to identify which roots were edible after processing, which seeds became toxic with age, which berries could be dried for winter, and where to dig for tubers under snow was staggering. This wasn't casual knowledge, it was survival itself. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Our ancestors' plant knowledge puts us to shame. They knew hundreds of species. Modern hunter-gatherers still do. The Hadza of Tanzania use over 300 plant species. Ice Age Europeans likely knew as many. We've been telling the wrong story. The Ice Age wasn't survived on meat alone. It was survived on botanical knowledge so deep, so intricate, that we're only beginning to understand it 30,000 years later. Your ancestors weren't just hunters, they were botanists. And that knowledge may have made the difference between extinction and survival. The cave entrance is now 120 feet underwater, accessible only to divers. But 20,000 years ago, Henry Costs would have walked into this chamber near Marseille. On the walls, something unprecedented in Ice Age art: seals, fish, and what appears to be a jellyfish. Our ancestors had discovered the sea. For most of human evolution, the ocean was a barrier, not a resource. Fishing requires specialized tools, knowledge of tides, and understanding seasonal spawns. It's complicated and dangerous, but as the last glacial maximum locked fresh water in ice, coastal resources became vital lifelines. At the Cueldaya site in Spain, the evidence is undeniable. Layer after layer of shells, fish bones, and seal remains. But look closer. These aren't random collections. The fish vertebrae tell a story. 80% come from spring-spawning species. These people understood seasonal fish runs. Dr. Miguel Cortez Sanchez holds up a bone that makes archaeologists' hearts race. A curved fish hook, 16,000 years old, carved from deer bone. It's not crude. The barb is carefully angled, and the shank shows wear from line attachment. This is sophisticated technology. But hooks are just the beginning, he explains. Archaeologists have also found gorges, straight bone pins that fish swallow, toggle harpoons, and net weights. These people had an entire fishing toolkit. The net weights change everything. A single fisherman with a hook catches one fish, but a group with nets can harvest hundreds. At Mediterranean sites, stone weights appear in standard sizes, suggesting standardized nets. This wasn't subsistence. It was industry. Here's what's revolutionary. Isotope analysis of human bones from coastal sites shows marine proteins making up 50% of the diet. Not occasionally, consistently, for generations. These weren't land hunters who occasionally ate fish. They were maritime specialists. The Japanese islands tell an even more dramatic story. At sites like Natsushima 9,000 years ago, tuna bones appear. Tuna don't come close to shore. Catching them requires boats, deep water knowledge, and incredible skill. Ice Age humans had become seafarers. But the most stunning evidence comes from the Channel Islands of California at Daisy Cave. John Aronson's team found something that shouldn't exist. 13,000-year-old shellfish hooks. The islands were never connected to the mainland. People had to boat there. This wasn't accidental drift. Aronson emphasizes they brought tools, established camps, and exploited marine resources. They were maritime people. The nutritional implications stagger. Fish provide omega-3 fatty acids, crucial for brain development. Shellfish offer minerals scarce in terrestrial foods. Seaweed, yes, they ate it, provides iodine essential for thyroid function. The ocean wasn't just food. It was a pharmacy. Consider the knowledge required. Tides that expose shellfish beds, spawning seasons for different species, which fish school where. how to read currents, where seals haul out. This isn't learned overnight. It's generational knowledge. At Pinnacle Point in South Africa, the story goes back even further. 164,000 years ago, humans were systematically harvesting shellfish. The behavior appears during a glacial period when inland resources crashed. The ocean saved them. The technology evolved rapidly. From simple shells with natural edges to crafted hooks, from hand gathering to nets. From shore foraging to deep water hunting, each innovation opened new ecological niches. But perhaps most remarkably, coastal sites show less seasonal stress than inland ones. Isotope analysis reveals steadier nutrition year-round. While inland hunters faced feast or famine cycles, coastal peoples had the ocean's buffet. The dive at Costco Cave revealed one final detail. Among the painted fish is a great orc, a flightless seabird extinct for centuries. The artist painted from life, capturing details only direct observation could provide. Ice Age humans didn't just discover the sea, they mastered it. And in mastering it, they found a resource that would sustain humanity through the harshest conditions Earth could offer. Your ancestors weren't just hunters and gatherers, they were fishermen. And that third revolution may have been the most important of all. The footprints in Wonder Lakes, Australia, tell a 20,000-year-old story. A group walking together, adults, teenagers, children. One set of prints shows someone running, probably chasing prey. Another walks with a limp, helped by someone beside them. This wasn't just a hunting party. This was a family. In a world where temperatures could kill in hours, where predators hunted in packs, where a broken ankle meant death, humans discovered the ultimate survival technology, each other. The basic unit wasn't the individual, explains anthropologist Dr. Polly Wisner. It was the band. 25 to 30 people bound by kinship and trust. Lose your band, lose your life. Modern hunter-gatherers give us windows into this world. The Yuani of the Kalahari still live in bands remarkably similar to our Ice Age ancestors. No chiefs, no formal leaders, decisions through discussion, power through persuasion, not force. But how does a group function without hierarchy? The answer challenges everything modern humans assume about organization. Ice Age bands operated on principles so effective they sustained humanity for 95% of our existence. First principle, radical sharing. At the Pensan site in France, archaeologists mapped exactly where reindeer carcasses were butchered 12,000 years ago. The distribution pattern is telling. Meat spread evenly across all hearths. No family hoarded. Everyone ate or no one did. This wasn't communist ideology. It was survival mathematics. A single hunter's success was random. Share today, eat tomorrow when your hunt fails. The math is brutal. In the Arctic, a lone hunter has a 1 in 20 chance of daily success. A band sharing has 19 in 20. Second principle, flexible leadership. Among the Netsilik Inuit studied before modernization, leadership shifted with context. Best tracker leads the hunt. Best seamstress organizes clothing production. Elder with geographic memory guides. Migration. Authority was situational, not permanent. This is sophisticated political organization, notes Dr. Christopher Bowe. It requires suppressing ego for group benefit. Very few modern humans can do this. The archaeological evidence supports this. Burial sites from the Gravitian period show remarkably equal treatment. No king's tombs, no wealth disparities. A child buried at soon under 28,000 years ago wears 5,000 ivory beads, but so do the adults. Status came from age and skill, not inheritance. Third principle, conflict resolution without violence. Modern forger bands show us how. Mockery for selfishness, storytelling that subtly criticizes, group pressure through silence. If these fail the ultimate sanction, the band splits. Richard Lee documented this social velocity among the Yu-Huansi. Bands regularly fish over conflicts, then rejoin when tempers cool. The archaeological record shows similar patterns. Sites occupied, abandoned, reoccupied in cycles, suggesting social rather than resource dynamics. But here's what's remarkable. Band society included everyone. At Shanidar Cave, a Neanderthal survived multiple injuries that left him partially blind, missing one arm and limping. He lived for years after these injuries. Someone fed him, someone protected him. The band carried him. At Cap's Cave in Israel, a child with severe developmental disabilities was buried with elaborate care 100,000 years ago. Red ochre shells, deer antlers, the same treatment as anyone else. These weren't societies that abandoned the weak. They incorporated them. The emotional technology was as crucial as the physical. Laughter around fires, songs that bound groups, stories that encoded survival information, teasing that prevented dominance, grief rituals that processed loss. Without these, bands fragmented. We think of emotional intelligence as modern, says Dr. Sarah Harui, but Ice Age survival required reading micro-expressions, managing jealousy, building trust. They were emotional athletes. The magic number appears consistently, 25 to 30 people. Large enough for genetic diversity. Small enough for everyone to know everyone. Split into family groups, but functioning as one unit. This wasn't coincidence. It was optimization refined over millennia. Modern humans struggle to maintain more than 150 meaningful relationships, Dunbar's number. But we can deeply trust only 15 to 30. That's not a bug in our psychology. It's an Ice Age feature. We're still wired for band society. When climate crashed and megafauna died, when glaciers advanced and resources vanished, bands survived. Not through individual heroics, but through collective competence. They proved something profound. Humans aren't just social animals. We're hyper-cooperators. And that cooperation, refined in Ice Age crucibles, made us unstoppable. Your ancestors didn't conquer the Ice Age through strength or intelligence alone. They survived through something far more powerful. Each other. Adoni Vestanish. The 26,000-year-old burial stops archaeologists called an elderly woman, probably 50 years old. Ancient by Ice Age standards. Her teeth worn to nubs. Her joints arthritic. By all logic, she should have died years ago. Yet here she lies, covered in red ochre, buried with the same care as the youngest hunter. Someone valued this grandmother. Someone kept her alive. In our brutal image of Ice Age survival, the elderly seem like burdens. Too slow to hunt, too weak to travel. Extra miles when every calorie counts. But the archaeological record tells a radically different story. Old people didn't just survive, they were essential. The human lifespan is an evolutionary puzzle, explains Dr. Christensen Hawkes, who developed the grandmother hypothesis. Chimpanzees rarely live past menopause. Most mammals die when reproduction ends, but human females live decades beyond fertility. Why? The answer revolutionizes our understanding of Ice Age survival. Grandmothers weren't burdens. They were libraries. In a world without writing, they were Google. Their knowledge meant life or death. Consider plant gathering, responsible for 70% of calories in most hunter-gatherer societies. At Ohelo II in Israel, archaeologists found 23,000-year-old grinding stones with residue from over 140 plant species. Each plant had its season, its location, its preparation method. Eat the wrong part, you die. Process it incorrectly, you starve. This isn't casual knowledge, emphasizes ethnobotanist Dr. Nancy Turner. Indigenous grandmothers today know thousands of plant details. Ice Age grandmothers knew more. The Hadza of Tanzania offer a glimpse. Elderly women know which tubers grow where, even when invisible underground. They remember fruiting cycles across decades. They can identify edible plants from poisonous lookalikes by subtle differences in leaf serrations. This knowledge takes 50 years to accumulate, but plants were just the beginning. At sites across Ice Age Europe, we find evidence of complex seasonal rounds, movements between resource patches timed with precision. Who remembered that the salmon ran early in hot summers? That certain valleys held snow late, preserving game for grandmothers? The biological evidence is compelling. Human children have the longest dependency period of any mammal. They can't feed themselves effectively until adolescence. Someone must provision them. Mothers, they're often pregnant or nursing. Fathers, they're hunting. Who fills the gap? Grandmothers. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers prove this. Hadza children with living grandmothers are 50% more likely to survive to adulthood. They're better nourished. They learn faster. The grandmother effect is measurable, dramatic, and universal. At Sunhir in Russia, genetic analysis of 34,000-year-old burials revealed something unexpected. The elderly woman buried there wasn't related to the children nearby. She was caring for children who weren't her biological grandchildren. Allopranting, cooperative, child-rearing extended beyond genetic lines. This is uniquely human, notes Dr. Sarah Harure. No other primate does this. Ice Age survival required networks of care beyond the nuclear family. The knowledge transfer was staggering. Medicine comes from grandmothers. At El Cedron in Spain, Neanderthal dental calculus contains compounds from medicinal plants, chamomile for inflammation, poplar bark containing aspirin precursors. This pharmaceutical knowledge was transmitted across generations, craft knowledge too. The oldest-eyed needles cluster at sites with multiple generations present. Venus figurines, those mysterious female sculptures, often depict elderly women. Were they honoring the knowledge keepers, the teachers of essential skills? Here's what changes everything. Modeling ancestral populations shows that groups with post-reproductive females had massive advantages. They could support more children, transmit more cultural knowledge, survive resource crashes. Grandmothers weren't just helpful. They were evolutionary drivers. The emotional technology matters, too. Grandmothers in forager societies are the conflict resolvers, the matchmakers, the storytellers who encode survival information in memorable narratives. They're the social glue when bands threaten to fragment. At Shanidar Cave, the famous flower burial might tell this story. The elderly individual was buried with medicinal plants, a healer, a knowledge keeper, someone valued not for strength, but for wisdom. The math is inescapable. Ice Age bands that supported elderly women had more surviving grandchildren. Those grandchildren carried genes for longevity. The cycle reinforced itself. Grandmothers created the conditions for their own evolution. This challenges our youth-obsessed culture's assumptions. In the harshest conditions humans ever faced, age wasn't weakness, it was wealth. Not physical wealth, but something more valuable. Knowledge that meant survival. Your existence proves this. You're here because Ice Age bands valued their grandmothers. Because someone 30,000 years ago decided that keeping an arthritic elder alive was worth the calories. That decision echoes through time. The Ice Age wasn't survived by the young and strong alone. It was survived by communities wise enough to value experience over strength, knowledge over youth, wisdom over vigor. Grandmothers didn't just help our ancestors survive the Ice Age. They may have been the reason we survived at all. The beads tell a love story 30,000 years old. Found at Doniva stones, they're made from shells that traveled 500 kilometers from the Mediterranean. But here's the puzzle. Identical beads appear at sites hundreds of kilometers apart. These weren't trade goods. They were engagement rings, Ice Age style. In a world of tiny bands scattered across frozen continents, finding a mate outside your family group wasn't just preferable. It was mandatory. The genetic math is unforgiving. Bands of 25 to 30 people contain maybe 5 to 7 potential partners in your age range. Half are your siblings or cousins. Inbreeding meant extinction. The solution was breathtaking in scope, explains geneticist Dr. Connie Mullion. Ice Age humans created mate exchange networks spanning thousands of square kilometers. These weren't random hookups. They were diplomatic missions. The evidence comes from multiple sources. Strontium isotope analysis of teeth reveals where people grew up versus where they died. At Sunghair in Russia, young adults show isotope signatures from regions 200 kilometers away. They moved for marriage. But how did isolated bands even know each other existed? The answer lies in aggregation sites, locations where multiple bands gathered seasonally. Pin's event in France shows evidence of such gatherings. During reindeer migrations, the site hosted not 30 people, but 300. It was speed dating Ice Age edition, jokes archaeologist Dr. Meg Coney, but with life or death stakes. The material evidence is striking. Jewelry styles, specific bead types, pendant designs, decoration patterns spread along predictable routes, not randomly like trade goods, but in clusters suggesting marriage networks. A woman buried at Pavlov Hills wears beads matching styles from sites 400 kilometers away. She likely brought them from her birth. Personal ornaments served as identity markers. Shell types indicated coastal origins. Amber met Baltic connections. Specific tooth pendants showed group affiliation. In a world without Facebook, jewelry was your profile. The logistics stagger modern minds. Young adults walking hundreds of kilometers through glaciated landscapes to find partners, but ethnographic evidence from recent hunter-gatherers shows similar patterns. Australian Aboriginal groups maintained marriage networks across continental scales. These weren't one-way trips. Genetic evidence shows bidirectional movement. suggesting complex alliance systems. A woman might move to her husband's band, but her brothers would seek wives from other groups, creating web-like connections across the landscape. At Kasruk in Lebanon, 40,000 years old, archaeologists found what might be history's first love token, a fox-tooth pendant with microscopic residue of red pigment worn against skin, transferred to a beloved. We'll never know, but someone cared enough to carry it from Europe to the Levant. These objects had biographies, explains Dr. Clive Gamble. They moved with people, accumulated memories, symbolized relationships. The social negotiations were complex. Which band gave more partners? How were alliances balanced? What happened when partnerships failed? Modern foragers show elaborate protocols, gift exchanges, multi-year negotiations, ritual fights that established hierarchy without bloodshed. Language barriers probably minimal. Linguistic analysis suggests Ice Age Europe had far fewer languages than today. Marriage networks would have standardized communication across regions. Love requires conversation. The genetic evidence is unequivocal. Ice Age humans maintained remarkable genetic diversity despite small populations. No signs of systematic inbreeding. Mitochondrial DNA shows female movement patterns. Y chromosome data reveals male migrations. Both sexes traveled for love. But perhaps most remarkably, these networks survived catastrophes. During the last glacial maximum, when populations crashed and bands scattered, marriage networks endured. Ornament styles continued spreading. Genetic diversity maintained. Love found a way. At Almerin Cave in Spain, Red Lady tells one such story. Buried 19,000 years ago, she wore ornaments from multiple regions. Isotope analysis shows she grew up elsewhere. Someone loved her enough to carry her body to a special place, cover her in precious ochre, surround her with flowers. These networks did more than prevent inbreeding. They spread innovations, new tool techniques, hunting strategies, survival knowledge. They created safety nets. If your band's territory failed, marriage ties met refuge elsewhere. They built peace. It's hard to fight your in-laws. We think of romance as modern, reflects Dr. Penny Spikins. But Ice Age humans loved, courted, negotiated marriages, suffered heartbreak. Their emotional lives were as complex as ours. The beads at Doni Vestonici contained DNA traces. Multiple individuals handled them. Gifts passed between lovers. Family heirlooms carried to new homes. Each bead a story we'll never fully know, but we know this. In the coldest period of human existence, when survival seemed impossible, love wasn't a luxury. It was a technology. The drive to find partners beyond your birth group created networks that spanned continents. These networks carried more than genes. They carried knowledge, innovation, and hope. Your ancestors didn't just survive the Ice Age through tools and fire. They survived through connections that transcended distance, danger, and even death. They survived through love. And 30,000 years later, those ancient networks echo in every marriage that crosses boundaries, every relationship that bridges differences, every love that connects distant worlds. Picture this. You're standing on a vast grassland that stretches beyond the horizon. To the west, Siberia. To the east, Alaska. But you're not on either continent. You're standing on a ghost land that no longer exists. Welcome to Beringia, the lost world that connected Asia to America. For 5,000 years, this wasn't just a bridge people crossed. It was home. The numbers are staggering. When sea levels dropped 400 feet during the last glacial maximum, Beringia emerged as a landmass twice the size of Texas. That's not a narrow ice corridor. It's an entire subcontinent complete with its own ecosystems, its own weather patterns, and its own human cultures. Dr. John Hoffuker calls it the center of the world for Ice Age humans. And he's not exaggerating. Here's what blows archaeologists' minds. People didn't rush across Beringia to reach America. They stopped. They stayed. They thrived. For thousands of years, humans lived on this land bridge, developing their own distinct culture. The genetic evidence is crystal clear. A population bottleneck shows humans were isolated here between 25,000 and 20,000 years ago. But what was life like on Beringia? Forget the image of a frozen wasteland. Fossil evidence reveals a mammoth steppe, vast grasslands dotted with Arctic willows and grasses supporting huge herds of mammoth, bison, horses, and reindeer. The landscape looked more like modern Mongolia than the Arctic Ocean that covers it today. These Beringians weren't struggling to survive. They were adapting, innovating, and waiting. Waiting for what? For the ice sheets blocking their path to melt. You see, even when the land bridge existed, two massive ice sheets, the Laurentide and Cordler, blocked the route south into the Americas. Beringia became a refuge, a waiting room at the gates of a new world. The people developed technologies perfectly suited to this unique environment: specialized hunting tools, improved cold weather clothing, and possibly even new social structures. Then around 16,500 years ago, something changed. The ice began to retreat. Coastal routes opened. River valleys became passable. The descendants of those patient Beringians began moving south, carrying with them technologies and knowledge accumulated over millennia. Within just 2,000 years, humans had spread from Alaska to the tip of South America, one of the fastest colonizations in human history. But it wasn't random wandering. These were the descendants of people who had spent 5,000 years perfecting survival in Earth's harshest environments. Today, Beringia lies beneath the Bering and Chukchi seas, but its legacy lives on in the DNA of every indigenous American, in archaeological sites from Montana to Chile, and in the profound truth it teaches us. Sometimes the greatest journeys require the patience to stop and wait. The bridge at the end of the world wasn't just a pathway. It was a crucible that forged the Americans. In the bitter cold of an Arctic winter 8,000 years ago, a team of dogs strained against the heavy load of a sled as they trudged through the unyielding ice, their breath forming plumes of vapor in the frigid air. The sled carried a precious cargo of volcanic glass mined from a distant Russian lake, its destination a trading post located a staggering 2,000 kilometers away. This was not a matter of survival. It was commerce, a glimpse into the first superhighway of human history, stretching across ice and time. The discovery of this route left archaeologists stunned and awestruck. On Zhukov Island, deep within the Arctic Ocean, they uncovered obsidian tools that told a story far beyond their time. Sophisticated chemical analysis revealed that these tools originated from Lake Kruno in Chukotka, Russia, a location a direct 1,500 kilometers away. But the actual journey spanned at least 2,000 kilometers, a grueling trek across frozen rivers, tundra, and unforgiving sea ice. Dr. Yoslav Kuzmin, who led the research, could not contain his amazement at the revelation. This wasn't just long-range trade. This was ultra-long-range transportation of raw materials, a feat that seemed beyond human possibility in the harsh, ice-bound world of the Ice Age. To put it into perspective, this journey was akin to traveling from London to Istanbul on foot, in the heart of the Arctic, under conditions so brutal they could easily claim a life. But here's what made this discovery so revolutionary. The obsidian wasn't carried by the people who mined it. Instead, analysis revealed a complex and sophisticated exchange network, one that spanned vast distances with relay points every 700 kilometers. This was no accident, no desperate wandering. It was organized trade, structured and intentional, complete with middlemen and established routes. The key to this system? The sled dogs of Zhukov Island. Archaeologists found the remains of these animals, revealing some of the earliest evidence of dog domestication for transportation. These were not household pets or hunting companions. They were engines of commerce, capable of pulling massive loads across distances that would have been impossible for humans alone. Vladimir Patulko, who excavated the site at Zhukov, painted a vivid picture of this ancient world. He described a time when, as winter began to recede and the days grew longer in March and April, dog sled teams would have connected far-flung settlements, their routes stretching across thousands of kilometers of frozen land. But the question lingered: why obsidian? Why risk everything to transport this volcanic glass across such vast distances? The answer lies in the blade's obsidian fractures in such a way that its edges are sharper than even modern surgical steel. In a world without metal, obsidian was the ultimate cutting tool, the equivalent of uranium in the Stone Age, a resource so precious that it justified the perilous journeys across treacherous terrain. The trade network uncovered in the Arctic revealed something profound about Ice Age humans. These were not isolated, desperate bands struggling for survival. These were connected communities, linked by information, resources, and innovations that spanned continents. When a new napping technique for obsidian was developed at Lake Crano, word spread to the Arctic. When the climate shifted in Siberia, the news traveled all the way to Alaska. This network, the ancient Obsidian Road, operated long before the famous Silk Road, connecting the Pacific to the Arctic Ocean. It created trade hubs, prehistoric shopping centers where furs, amber, shells, and tools were exchanged. Most remarkably, this network survived one of the most brutal cold snaps in history, the Younger Dryas, that struck 12,900 years ago. While other cultures collapsed, the Arctic traders adapted and endured. Their dog sleds kept running, their obsidian continued to flow, and their trade connections remained strong. Today, as climate change causes the permafrost to melt, more of these ancient roots are being revealed, each discovery adding another piece to the puzzle of Ice Age globalization. A world where distance meant little to people armed with dogs, determination, and volcanic glass. As the ice sheets advanced like frozen tsunamis crushing everything in their path, mile-high glaciers bulldozed forests, filled valleys, and transformed fertile lands into barren wastelands of ice. Yet even in this inhospitable world, life found a way to survive. In isolated pockets across Europe, small groups of humans found sanctuary in ice-free islands in the midst of a frozen sea. These refugia, as they are known, didn't just save humanity, they shaped the course of our development. Dr. Clive Finals, studying the caves of Gibraltar, made a startling discovery. While much of northern Europe lay buried beneath ice, the southern tip of Iberia bloomed with life, a Mediterranean Garden of Eden, and a world turned to frozen hell. The evidence of this survival is etched into our very DNA. Modern Europeans carry genetic markers that trace back to three primary refugia: Iberia, the Italian peninsula, and the Balkans. Each of these refugia developed its own genetic signature, its own cultural innovations, and its own strategies for survival. But these were not places of luxury or comfort. Imagine the entire human population of Europe, around 30,000 people, packed into a handful of scattered pockets. This was the genetic bottleneck revealed by modern DNA analysis, a terrifying moment when humanity in Europe teetered on the brink of extinction. In the Cantabrian mountains of Iberia, humans sought shelter in caves that would become their generational homes. At El Castillo and Altamira, they didn't just survive, they created some of the greatest art the world has ever seen. The famous cave paintings, far from being mere decorations, were the Netflix of the Ice Age, telling stories of survival and passing down essential knowledge to future generations. Meanwhile, in the Italian refuge, centered around the Po Valley, humans developed unique adaptations to their environment. Archaeological sites like Grotta Pagliacci reveal a diet consisting mainly of small game rabbits, birds, and snails, an ingenious adaptation to a world where the mammoth was no longer available. In these times, you had to make do with what you could find, and these people excelled at exploiting every available resource, a skill that would prove invaluable when the ice eventually retreated. The Balkans, another of the refugia, tells yet another story. Nestled between the Carpathian Mountains and the Mediterranean, this region became a melting pot of cultures, where the last of the Neanderthals mingled with modern humans. At sites like Vinegar Cave in Croatia, evidence of Neanderthal presence persists, offering a final chapter in the story of our closest relatives. Yet, even as they disappeared, Neanderthals left their mark on us. Professor Oxala Garcia Rodriguez's groundbreaking 2024 research revealed that these refugia were not isolated prisons, as once believed. Instead, they were interconnected with people moving between them, carrying new genes, ideas, and innovations. Maritime technology flourished in these coastal refugia, where isolated populations relied on sea routes to maintain contact. When the ice began to retreat 19,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. Populations exploded out of their refugia, like springs released from their tension. The Iberians moved north, the Italians spread west, and the Balkans pushed east. Each group carried with them the genetic markers and cultural innovations they had developed in isolation. It was these movements that created the diversity of modern Europe, the languages, technologies, and genetic variations that define us today. The Basque language, Europe's oldest, likely survived within the Iberian refugium. The artistic traditions that later flourished during the Renaissance can trace their roots back to the caves of Italy. Today, as we face our own climate crisis, the refugia offer a powerful lesson in resilience. Survival is not just about endurance. It's about adaptation, innovation, and maintaining connections, even in the darkest of times. Our ancestors didn't merely hide in these sanctuaries, they used them as laboratories for human ingenuity, crafting a future for themselves and for us. Yet, as humanity celebrated its triumphs, the story was far from over. After thousands of years of brutal cold, the world was finally beginning to warm. Forests began to return to Europe, megafauna populations began to recover, and humans expanded out of their refugia. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, 12,900 years ago, winter returned with a vengeance. Scientists now call this event the Younger Dryas, a period when the warming that had given humanity hope was abruptly reversed. In less than a decade, the world was plunged back into a devastating cold. For those who lived through it, it must have felt like the end of everything they had fought for. In Greenland, temperatures plummeted by an astonishing 15 degrees Celsius in a mere 3 years. Just 3 years. Imagine your hometown picture, Los Angeles, transformed into Antarctic conditions before a child could even learn to walk. Trees that had stood for centuries withered and died in a single winter. Lakes that had thawed for generations froze solid, and they stayed that way for an unimaginable 1,300 years. Dr. Wallace Breer, who first proposed the mechanism behind this catastrophe, described it as a massive heart attack in Earth's climate system. The patient survived, but barely. What caused this apocalypse, this sudden freeze that gripped the world? The leading theory reads like something out of a disaster movie. As the ice sheets melted, a massive freshwater lake, Lake Agassiz larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined, suddenly drained into the North Atlantic. This colossal freshwater tsunami disrupted ocean currents that had been transporting warm water northward. The global climate system crashed like a computer hitting a fatal error. For humans who had just begun to taste prosperity, the Younger Dryas was catastrophic. In North America, the Clovis culture, famous for their masterful mammoth hunting and their elegant spear points, simply vanished from the archaeological record. Not declined, not evolved, vanished. Dr. Vance Haynes, studying Clovis sites, found a chilling pattern. Below the black mat, which marked the Younger Dryas layer, there were Clovis artifacts. Above it, there was nothing. It's as if they had simply disappeared. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. While North American populations faced extinction, other groups across the globe adapted in remarkable and revolutionary ways. In the Levant, modern-day Jordan, Syria, and Israel, something transformative happened. Faced with the looming threat of starvation, as wild grains became scarce, someone had a desperate idea. What if we could plant these seeds ourselves? And so the Nachfian culture, on the brink of extinction, invented agriculture. At Abu Arera in Syria, archaeologist Gordon Hillman found evidence of this transition written in teeth and seeds. Below the Younger Dryas layer, diverse wild plants and healthy teeth were found. Above it, there were cultivated rye seeds and worn-down teeth from grinding grain. This marked the birth of farming. It wasn't a gentle, gradual shift. Skeletal evidence shows signs of malnutrition, violence, and immense population stress. Average heights dropped. Teeth showed signs of repetitive strain from grinding grain. But despite all this, they survived. In Europe, the responses to the Younger Dryas varied dramatically. While some populations faced total collapse, others, particularly in Eastern Europe, actually thrived. Dr. Isabel Schmidt's 2025 research revealed a massive population shift eastward as herds adapted to the renewed cold. The Younger Dryas also triggered humanity's first documented migrations. Genetic evidence shows populations moving from Central Asia into the Americas, from Africa into Arabia, migrations that brought humans from all corners of the earth to wherever survival was possible. Most remarkably, this catastrophe sparked an unprecedented wave of innovation. The bow and arrow appeared independently on multiple continents. Pottery emerged in Japan. Food storage techniques advanced rapidly. Faced with near extinction, humans didn't just adapt, they revolutionized their entire way of life. When the Younger Dryas ended as abruptly as it had begun, with temperatures rising by 10 degrees Celsius in perhaps just 50 years, humanity emerged, transformed. The descendants of Ice Age hunters had become farmers, potters, and architects. The foundation of civilization had been laid by catastrophe. The Younger Dryas teaches us a crucial lesson. Climate change isn't always gradual. It's often punctuated by moments of shocking, world-altering transformation. Our ancestors survived not by staying the same, but by becoming something entirely new. Stand in any natural history museum and gaze up at the towering skeleton of a mammoth. Look at its massive tusks and enormous skull. Now imagine this. In just 2,000 years, these giants, along with other megafauna, such as giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves, disappeared from the earth. The question that has haunted scientists for decades is simple. Who killed them? The answer, however, is anything but simple. Professor Paul Martin fired the first shot in this scientific debate with his blitzkrieg hypothesis. His theory was straightforward. Humans arrived and the megafauna died. Case closed. It's like following a trail of blood, he argued. Wherever humans showed up, extinctions followed within centuries. The evidence seemed damning. In Australia, megafauna disappeared 46,000 years ago, right after humans arrived. In the Americas, the extinction pulse hit around 13,000 years ago, suspiciously close to human colonization. In Madagascar, it happened just 2,000 years ago again, right after humans arrived. But Dr. Russell Graham saw the situation differently. Look at the climate data, he insisted. The Younger Dryas brought dramatic temperature swings, and the mammoth's favorite plants vanished. Their habitat was shattered into isolated pockets. Humans didn't kill them, he argued. Climate change did. Then came the twist. In 2021, breakthrough research led by Dr. Matt Alanto analyzed ancient DNA from hundreds of mammoth remains. The results were eye-opening. Both camps had been right and wrong. Here's what really happened. Climate change weakened the megafauna populations, fragmenting their habitats into isolated pockets. Then humans delivered the final blow. It wasn't murder or natural death, it was assisted extinction. The evidence is written in bones. At Prdusty in the Czech Republic, archaeologists uncovered a site containing over 1,000 mammoths. But these weren't random kills. Analysis revealed selective hunting, with a focus on young males, much like the poaching patterns seen in modern elephant populations. Humans weren't hunting out of desperation. They were strategic, selective, and devastating. But the mammoths were just the beginning. Giant ground sloths, some weighing as much as elephants, vanished from the Americas. In one cave in Brazil, researchers found sloth bones with cut marks, dated to 12,600 years ago, some of the last of their kind, butchered by human hands. The story of the saber-toothed cats is even more poignant. These apex predators had survived dozens of ice ages, but isotope analysis of their bones reveals that their final years were filled with desperation. Their prey mammoths, bison, and horses were disappearing, and in their last years some saber-tooths resorted to eating each other. Cannibalism born from starvation. Dr. Jacqueline Gill, an expert in ancient dung fungus, tracks megafauna populations through their droppings. Her research revealed a crucial insight. Large herbivore populations began to crash before the climate shifted dramatically. The smoking gun wasn't the temperature, it was the timing. As she explains, megafauna began to decline when humans arrived, not when the climate began to change. But humans weren't mindless killers. At Kostiny in Russia, archaeologists found mammoth bone houses and storage pits filled with frozen meat. These hunters were thinking long-term, preserving resources for the future. The tragedy, however, was that the megafauna couldn't reproduce fast enough to sustain even careful hunting. The extinction of the megafauna had profound consequences. Without them, entire ecosystems transformed. The mammoth steppe, once maintained by these grazing giants, became tundra and forest. Fruit trees that evolved with megafauna to spread their seeds struggled to thrive. Even soil composition changed. Without these massive herbivores recycling nutrients, humanity was left with a choice: innovate or perish. The result? Agriculture, animal domestication, and the roots of civilization itself. Today, as we face the sixth mass extinction, the ghost of the megafauna reminds us that we've been here before. We are both the asteroid and the survivors. Deep in Lascaux Cave, your headlamp illuminates something that stops you cold, a thundering herd of aurochs charges across the stone ceiling, so vivid that you instinctively step back. Horses gallop in perfect anatomical detail. A falling bison, pierced by spears, tumbles with its legs splayed in a way only someone who'd seen many kills would know to paint. This isn't mere decoration. It's a survival manual written in pigment and stone. For decades, archaeologists dismissed cave art as hunting magic or primitive religion. Then Dr. April Knoll made a discovery that changed everything. The animals weren't random. They were seasonal field guides. Look at the deer in Fondome, she explains, pointing to seemingly decorative details. Those aren't artistic flourishes. Those are September antlers, just shed from the velvet. And the horses? Their coats show specific seasonal patterns: winter fur, summer coats, and pregnant mares in spring. The revelation was staggering. These caves weren't temples. They were libraries. At Chauvet Cave, dated to 36,000 years ago, the sophistication of the artwork was breathtaking. Lions are shown hunting in coordinated groups, behavior that would have been crucial to avoid. Rhinos display territorial markings, and bears are depicted in various seasonal states, from winter dormancy to summer aggression. But the real genius lies in the placement. Dr. Jean Klotz, who studied Paleolithic caves for decades, noticed patterns. Dangerous predators are painted in hard-to-reach places, requiring effort to see, just like in real life, where avoiding them required vigilance. Prey animals cluster in accessible galleries, organized by season and behavior. The techniques themselves encode information. At Altamira, bison are painted using the cave's natural contours. Bulges become muscles, cracks become fur patterns. To understand the image, you must understand the cave. And to understand the cave is to understand the landscape, its augmented reality, Stone Age style. Some images are even more complex. The sorcerer at Adafur shows a human-animal hybrid surrounded by accurate depictions of animal mating behaviors. This wasn't fantasy. It was a teaching tool about animal reproductive cycles, crucial information for predicting herd movements. The abstract symbols that haunted researchers for years, dots, lines, and geometric patterns, seemed meaningless until Genevieve Vampetzinger cracked part of the code. These symbols, replicated across Europe, were consistent markers. Calendar systems, clan signs, direction markers. We're still decoding them, but their standardization across thousands of miles suggests that information exchange networks were beginning to take shape. Color itself carried meaning. Red ochre found at every major site wasn't just available, it was essential. Chemical analysis shows that different sources of ochre were specifically selected and transported hundreds of miles. The same red that marks important animals in caves is found in burials, on tools, and in living sites. It was the highlighter pen of the Paleolithic. The acoustic dimension adds yet another layer. At Resonance Cave in Spain, researchers discovered painted animals concentrated in areas with specific acoustic properties. Red dots mark spots where echoes last the longest. Were these multimedia presentations combining visual and audio elements? Imagine stories told by firelight with sound effects provided by the cave itself. Most remarkably, this wasn't regional art, it was a continental system. The same techniques, symbols, and seasonal markers appear from Spain to the Urals. Information was flowing across thousands of miles, preserved in pigment. Dr. David Lewis Williams argues that we're looking at the world's first information technology. These caves stored and transmitted survival-critical data across generations. A child learning these images gained thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. The art of survival wasn't about duty. It was about encoding intelligence in a form that could outlast any individual, any generation, any catastrophe. The paintings survived the Younger Dryas, the megafauna extinction, and 30,000 years of human history. In our age of digital fragility, perhaps we should ask, will our information last as long as theirs? In Hofels Cave, Germany, archaeologist Nicholas Connard brushed away 43,000 years of dust to reveal something extraordinary. A flute carved from a griffin vulture's wing bone, so perfectly preserved that when researchers created a replica and played it, the notes rang true. A pentatonic scale that wouldn't sound out of place in modern music. But this wasn't humanity's first instrument. It wasn't even close. The Divya-Babe flute, crafted by Neanderthals 60,000 years ago from a cave bear femur, suggests that music predates our species. But it was during the Ice Age that music exploded into something revolutionary, a survival technology disguised as entertainment. Dr. Francesco Darrow, studying these ancient instruments, made a startling discovery. The bones weren't randomly selected swan wing bones, mammoth ivory, and cave bear femurs. Each material was chosen for its specific acoustic properties. These weren't toys, they were precision instruments. At Istritz Cave in France, archaeologists found a workshop, a literal Ice Age recording studio, containing over 20 flutes in various stages of completion, along with the tools to make them. But here's the kicker, they were standardized. The finger holes were placed using mathematical ratios that produce consistent scales. Mass production 35,000 years ago. Why did starving, freezing humans invest precious time crafting flutes? The answer lies in what music does to the human brain. Dr. Danielle Leverton's research shows that music activates more regions of the brain simultaneously than any other activity. It synchronizes groups, enhances memory, and triggers endorphin release. For Ice Age humans, music wasn't entertainment. It was social glue, a memory aid, and an antidepressant rolled into one. The archaeological evidence supports this. Musical instruments cluster at aggregation sites, places where multiple bands gathered, like Doni Vestanish, where mammoth hunters assembled annually. Researchers found not just flutes, but drums made from mammoth skulls, rattles from shells, and what appears to be a xylophone made from cave bear bones. But music was more than just a social lubricant. Dr. Stephen Mithen argues that it was proto-language encoding information in memorable patterns. Consider the challenge. How do you pass down critical survival information without writing? You sing it. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers reveal song maps musical journeys that encode navigation information. A melody might represent a river, with rhythm changes indicating rapids or safe crossings. The Aboriginal Australian songlines preserve navigation routes tens of thousands of years old. Ice Age Europeans likely had similar systems. The instruments themselves tell stories. Bone flutes required months of preparation. First, selecting the right bone swan radius bones were preferred for their natural acoustic chambers. Then careful extraction without damaging the bone, cleaning, drying, and aging. The delicate process of creating finger holes in ancient bone flutes, where one wrong move could mean starting over, became an act of cultural significance. A moment of profound investment that only made sense if music was essential, and indeed it was. At the Gisson-Claustella Cave, archaeological findings of musical instruments were unearthed in layers alongside the earliest figurative art and symbolic ornaments, painting a picture of a time when music, art, and symbolism emerged together in a powerful fusion of behavioral modernity. Dr. Robert Till, fascinated by the acoustic properties of these painted caves, made a discovery that could only be described as extraordinary. The handprints and dots painted on cave walls often corresponded to what he termed acoustic sweet spots, which prompted an intriguing question. Could these markings represent rhythm notations? Was this the earliest form of sheet music carved onto stone? This idea took hold with further research, revealing that the musical traditions of ancient humans, like their art, displayed regional variations. German flutes, for example, differed from their French counterparts, not merely in form, but in subtle yet consistent ways akin to the regional dialects of language. This discovery suggested that music served not just as a form of personal expression, but as both a unifier and an identifier, marking the unique cultural signatures of groups while simultaneously facilitating communication across different communities. The discovery of bone flutes across Europe added another layer of mystery. These instruments revealed far-reaching trade networks. In Hollefels, Germany, a flute made from the wing bone of a griffon vulture, a species that did not live locally, was found, hinting at the long journeys these materials had traveled, perhaps carried by musicians themselves or traded as instruments. The sheer effort involved in crafting such instruments was staggering. At Stewart's Cave in France, an entire workshop, an ancient recording studio, had been uncovered, more than 20 flutes in various stages of completion, each designed with mathematical precision to produce consistent scales, as though mass production had taken place 35,000 years ago. But why, researchers wondered, would starving, freezing humans dedicate precious time to the crafting of such delicate instruments? Dr. Daniel Leverton's research offered a potential answer. Music engages more regions of the brain simultaneously than any other activity, synchronizing groups, enhancing memory, and triggering the release of endorphins. For these Ice Age humans, music was more than entertainment. It was social glue, a memory aid, and an antidepressant all in one. Evidence of this came from the archaeological record, where musical instruments were consistently found in aggregation sites, places where multiple bands of people gathered together. At Doni Vista Nichu, an annual gathering spot for mammoth hunters, researchers uncovered not just flutes, but also drums made from mammoth skulls, rattles crafted from shells, and even a primitive xylophone fashioned from cave bear bones. However, music was not only a social lubricant, it was also an essential tool for survival, a form of proto-language that encoded critical information in memorable patterns. The challenge faced by ancient humans was how to pass down survival information in the absence of written language, and their solution was song. Modern-day ethnographic studies of hunter-gatherer societies reveal that song maps musical representations of navigation routes were passed down through generations. These melodies encoded information about rivers, rapids, and safe crossings, and it is likely that Ice Age Europeans had similar systems. The musical instruments themselves spoke volumes about the ingenuity of their creators. The process of creating a bone flute was long and intricate, requiring the careful selection of bones with the ideal acoustic properties. Swan wing bones were preferred for their natural resonance, and the extraction of the bones had to be done with the utmost care to avoid damage. After extraction, the bones were cleaned, dried, and aged, with each step of the process requiring months of attention. The final stage, the delicate act of boring the finger holes, was fraught with the risk of starting over if a mistake was made. Such an investment of time could only be justified if music was indeed a vital part of life, and it was. As Dr. Francesco Diro's studies of ancient instruments revealed, the materials chosen for these flutes, swan wings, mammoth ivory, cave bear femurs, were not randomly selected. Each bone, each material was chosen with precision for its unique acoustic properties. These instruments were not simple toys. They were precision tools designed to carry the weight of human expression. In Gisen-Claustella Cave, the discovery of musical instruments in the same layers as figurative art suggested that music, like art, was an integral part of the human experience. Together they formed a package deal of behavioral modernity. The rhythmic patterns preserved in the art, the painstakingly crafted bone flutes, were the hallmarks of a society that understood the power of sound, its ability to communicate, to unite, and to create meaning. Music was not just a form of expression, it was a means of survival, a technology disguised as entertainment. In Hollefels Cave, Germany, archaeologist Nicholas Conard's discovery of a flute carved from a griffon vulture's wing bone was a revelation. The flute was so perfectly preserved that when researchers created a replica and played it, the notes rang true, a pentatonic scale that remarkably wouldn't sound out of place in modern music. But this wasn't humanity's first instrument. Far from it. The Divjob Babe flute, crafted by Neanderthals 60,000 years ago from the bone of a cave bear, suggested that music predated our species. Yet it was during the Ice Age that music exploded into something revolutionary, a survival technology disguised as art, a vital social tool in an unforgiving world. The discovery of flutes in ancient caves revealed that these instruments were not mere novelties, but precision-crafted tools, each bone selected for its unique acoustic qualities. Swan wing bones, cave bear femurs, and mammoth ivory were the raw materials of choice. In fact, Dr. Francesco Diro's research showed that these ancient instruments were made with an understanding of acoustics that would surprise even modern musicians. The finger holes, drilled with exact precision, followed mathematical ratios to ensure a consistent and harmonious scale. These were not instruments for casual amusement. They were carefully crafted tools that played a central role in the lives of Ice Age humans. At Stewart's Cave, over 20 flutes in various stages of completion were discovered, along with the tools used to create them. This was a literal Ice Age recording studio where the sounds of survival were captured and shared across generations. What was most remarkable about this discovery was the evidence of mass production, an unprecedented level of standardization that suggested these instruments were not simply handcrafted one at a time. Rather, the process was industrialized, with each flute following a set of precise measurements and ratios that ensured the creation of perfectly tuned instruments. Why, then, would these freezing, starving humans devote such precious time and effort to the creation of bone flutes? The answer lies in the power of music itself. Dr. Daniel Leverton's research into the human brain reveals that music activates more regions of the brain than any other activity, creating synchronization among groups, enhancing memory, and even releasing endorphins that combat the effects of stress and anxiety. For Ice Age humans, music was far more than a form of entertainment. It was a vital tool for social cohesion, memory retention, and emotional well-being. The archaeological record supports this theory, showing that musical instruments were most commonly found in aggregation sites, where different groups of humans came together to share resources, stories, and songs. At Doni Vistanishu, a site where mammoth hunters gathered each year, researchers found not only flutes but also drums made from mammoth skulls, rattles made from shells, and even a primitive xylophone made from cave bear bones. These instruments were used not only for social bonding, but also for practical purposes, encoding survival information in the form of songs. Dr. Stephen Mithen argued that music was a form of proto-language, a way of encoding critical information in a way that could be easily remembered and passed down. The challenge of passing down survival information without written language was met with the invention of song. Modern hunter-gatherers still use song maps to encode information about navigation, and it is likely that Ice Age Europeans did the same. The instruments themselves tell the story of human ingenuity. The process of crafting a bone flute required months of preparation and attention to detail. First, the right bone had to be chosen, preferably from a swan or other bird with a naturally resonant wing bone. Then the bone had to be carefully extracted, cleaned, dried, and aged. Finally, the delicate process of boring the finger holes had to be done with precision. One wrong move could mean starting over. This painstaking effort was only justified if music was essential to survival, and it was. The discovery of musical instruments alongside figurative art and symbolic ornaments in caves suggests that music, art, and symbolism were intertwined in the lives of ancient humans. Together, they formed the package deal of behavioral modernity that marked the birth of human culture itself. Today, when we play these ancient flutes, we are not simply hearing notes, we are hearing the very beginning of human culture, preserved in bone and breath across 40,000 years of silence. Cave paintings reveal a sophisticated understanding of perspective, movement, and narrative composition concepts that would only be rediscovered in the Renaissance. Even child-rearing practices were advanced. At Kringvackberg, the burial of premature twins shows that under Ice Age conditions, they were kept alive for weeks after birth without modern medicine. This investment in non-viable infants reveals not only surplus resources, but also a profound humanity. Dr. Eric Trenk, studying Neanderthal and early modern human remains, found numerous individuals with healed injuries that would have required extensive care. These were not societies where the weak were abandoned. They were communities where every individual mattered. The distribution of artifacts tells its own story. Personal ornaments weren't confined to a few rich burials, but were widespread. Tools bore individual styles and makers' marks, indicating a society with specialists, artists, and individual expression. Perhaps most tellingly, they had pets. At Predmosti, a dog burial from 32,000 years ago included a mammoth bone placed in the dog's mouth, a final meal for the afterlife. You don't bury dogs with grave goods when you're starving. The myth of the nasty, brutish, and short Ice Age life dissolves in the face of this evidence. These were people who created art, made music, traveled continents, and buried their loved ones with care that spans millennia. They didn't just survive the ice, they built a civilization that left no monuments, but achieved something greater. They sustained human dignity in Earth's darkest hour. The old hunter stood at the edge of the forest, confused where once stretched endless tundra, trees now grew. The reindeer herds his grandfather's grandfather had followed were gone, replaced by aurochs and deer that hid in the woods. The reliable world of ice was melting, and with it, everything his people had known for 1,000 generations. Climate change wasn't coming, it was here. 15,000 years ago, the Great Melt began in earnest. But this wasn't the gentle warming we imagine. Dr. Conrad Wong's ice core data reveals the shocking truth. Temperatures rose by 10 degrees Celsius in some regions in just 50 years. Imagine New York developing Miami's climate before a child becomes a grandparent. For humans who had perfected Ice Age survival over 40,000 years, this warmth was catastrophic. The very skills that had saved them now became obsolete. At Starcar in England, archaeologists uncovered the remains of the last hunter-gatherers trying to maintain their way of life. The site, dated to 11,000 years ago, shows desperate innovation. Wooden platforms were built over new wetlands, specialized tools for forest hunting were created, and headdresses made from deer skulls were found, possibly shamanic attempts to understand their changing world. But the biggest shock came from their diet. Isotope analysis by Dr. Nikki Milner revealed a sudden shift from varied diets to a heavy reliance on fish. The great herds were gone, and the diverse plant foods were changing. These master survivalists, once dependent on mammoths and other game, were now reduced to living on pike and perch. The social upheaval was even more dramatic. The band society that had perfected itself over millennia began breaking down. At Leenski Ver on the Danube, we see something new. permanent settlements, houses with foundations, and cemeteries with hierarchical burials. The egalitarian world of the Ice Age was stratifying. Dr. Brian Hayden calls this the end of the original affluent society. Hunter-gatherers had worked perhaps 20 hours a week. Early farmers worked 40 to 60 hours. Health declined, violence increased, but populations exploded. Why did they do it? Why trade health and freedom for backbreaking agricultural labor? The answer lies in demographic trap theory. As the climate warmed, populations grew. Territories that once supported a single band now held three. The old solution, fission, and movement no longer worked. Every territory was occupied. For the first time in human history, there was nowhere else to go. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, we see humanity's response to this crisis. Massive stone circles, carved with dying Ice Age animals, were built by hunter-gatherers 11,500 years ago. Dr. Klaus Schmidt, who excavated the site, called it the last stand of the hunter-gatherers. These weren't temples to gods, they were monuments to a dying way of life. The transition wasn't voluntary. Genetic evidence shows that most European hunter-gatherers didn't become farmers. They were replaced by them. When agricultural populations arrived from the Near East 8,000 years ago, hunter-gatherer DNA largely vanished within centuries. The children of the ice were overwhelmed by the children of grain, but fragments of Ice Age wisdom persisted. In Scandinavia, the pitted ware culture maintained hunting and gathering alongside farming for 1,000 years. They traded seal oil for grain, amber for pottery, two worlds coexisting until farming's demographic advantage inevitably won. The psychological impact of this shift was profound. Art changed from naturalistic animals to abstract symbols. Music shifted from portable instruments to fixed installations. Stories went from memorized epics to written texts. The direct, intimate world of the band became the abstract, hierarchical world of civilization. Yet, something was gained in this loss. Writing preserved knowledge. Agriculture supported specialists. Cities enabled innovation. The warmth that ended the Ice Age way of life also enabled everything we call civilization. As we face our own climate crisis, the lesson is clear. Adaptation isn't optional. The Ice Age hunters' descendants didn't choose agriculture. It chose them. They could no more return to hunting and gathering than we can return to agriculture. Forward is the only direction, but perhaps we can learn from both worlds. The Ice Age taught us cooperation, resilience, and sustainability. The Warm Age taught us innovation, accumulation, and growth. Our challenge is synthesis, combining Ice Age wisdom with modern capability. The ice melted, and with it, a world. But from that meltwater grew everything we are. The question now is, as our world melts again, what will grow from it?